we the people, this here united Hot Not Pod, in order to form a more perfect podcast that establishes dick jokes, provides quim gags, and promotes the general assessment of the great names of yesteryear, their hotness, to secure their posterity on the biotapdadistry, do ordain and establish this filthy audio offering, the Historical Hot or Not Podcast. I am Aidan McCaffrey. I am neither a historian nor an American, and this is
Catherine Mather, and I am also not a historian or American, but that is a very convincing American accent there, Aidan, well done. But we are comedians, and we are horny for history, and today we are joined by an actual proper historian. He's called Andy Gawthorpe, and you are the expert in politics and foreign policy of the USA at Leiden University in the Netherlands. Is that correct?
That's me, Catherine. Yeah, and I'm not a comedian, but I will be trying kind of embarrassingly hard on this podcast.
That's all any of us do here. Try embarrassingly hard to be
because
something
we're trying
not.
so hard to be taken seriously as historians of some kind. So we'll meet somewhere in the middle.
So thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to tell the people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Andy Gawthorpe. I'm a historian of the US, and I hate this word expert. Like, no one should call themselves an expert, but that's a word you have to use to have credibility, I guess. I'm also an expert on US politics, and I teach about it, write about it. I have a podcast of my own called America Explained. You should check it out because it's awesome. Aidan even told me it was awesome before we started recording.
It is awesome.
I don't know if he's going to repeat that on air or not, but he did say it, trust me.
It's very well reviewed.
Yeah, by the 12 people who reviewed it on Apple Podcasts. And yeah, I'm super happy to be here today and have a super serious conversation about history.
That's all of our conversations here. Mad, super serious.
Maybe that's where we're going wrong, Kath. So Andy's saying you have to say you're an expert. Maybe that's what we're doing wrong. We should say we are experts at sort of historical dick jokes or something. No, that's what we can do.
Yeah, but I honestly don't think we are that either, to be honest. You're very good at a pun, Aidan. I'm not.
I
don't know what I'm good at.
How many dick jokes do you have to make to be an expert? I don't know. You know, they say you have to do something for like 10,000 hours before you're an expert. So have you been making dick jokes for 10,000 hours?
10,000 genital-based puns. And then you are the, I don't know, the bark of bollock puns. I don't know. Some of it's just alliteration, and it makes you sound funnier than you are. According to the website andygort.com, you've been granted a €1 million grant for research project into American foreign policy and liberalism. Is this correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I try not to talk about it in front of taxpayers in the Netherlands, but this is something that happened. Yeah.
How much is £1 million euro worth?
Is this the kind of thing where if this got out in the Netherlands, they'd have I'm trying to think of what's the Netherlands version of Brexit.
Nexit.
Yeah.
Nexit. That's something that people have been talking about. You know, not just because of my €1 million grant, but you know, we do have a pretty right-wing government here right now, and they're unhappy about things like that.
Well, they did say
we're not the reason the EU dissolves. That'd be really sad.
Yeah, would be sad.
They did say after Brexit, or at least people on the right, the Brexiteers did say this is going to start a wave of a sort of the domino effect of everyone leaving the EU, and it didn't. I mean, maybe it could still happen, I guess, but it just didn't happen at all. They were totally wrong. It was just the UK simpering out of the EU with our tail between our legs.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like this fantasy of separating yourself from the rest of Europe is a lot easier when you have a moat around you, right? And like there's water. But I mean, the idea of the Netherlands or France doing that, it's completely nonsensical. You know, you can't. I mean, on the fucking border, you know, same currency. It's not going to happen. And even the parties here that we're talking about that don't talk about it anymore because they've realized it's silly.
And also, I think if we'd have done well post-Brexit, people might have gone, oh.
Right,
But
right, right.
absolute shit show.
And none of the right-wing politicians here are like, look at Britain, they did great. They just avoid talking about it. So, and we know why, because it's a mess.
Yes. But I guess we're not here to talk Dutch nor British politics. We've got a special episode coming up. I will explain the format to the good people. Some people might have just joined in for this episode. So here at Historical Hot or Not, what we like to do every episode, we pitch a potential suitor to one another from the eTrothed dating app that is very much real. We start off by looking at their profile picture and making a superficial assessment of them. Then we learn a bit more about their life and times, and at the end we will decide whether we will fuck them or not. If we will, they end up on the Bear Your Tap Thatastry with other greats. If not, we will simply ghost them. So today,
is your podcast this highbrow, Andy?
Yeah, probably less highbrow.
If you open your eTrothed app, and you will see the profile picture of Gouverneur. He is 64, and he was born in the Bronx, the province of New York, in British America. So, what do we make of this guy? Is he hot? Is he not? You go first, Andy, since you are our guest.
Well, when I look at this picture and you bear in mind it's like 1750 or some stupid year like that, I mean, here's a guy who's got money, right? He's wearing some dapper clothes. He's got a very big nose that tells me he got a lot of nutrition in childhood, right? He's a healthy, wealthy guy. And what more could a 1770, woman ask for? I think he looks pretty good.
Yeah, you, Kath?
in good nick, isn't it? Is that his real hair, or is he wearing a one of those wigs that they all wore back in the olden times, which has to be one of those fashion trends that you look back and go, "Oh God, no!"
Powdered wigs,
right? Yeah. I don't know. Is that his own hair or not? I mean, either way, it's pretty stupid, right?
But it is, because his fringe is extremely short. Like, I remember my dad accidentally giving me that kind of fringe when I was a kid at school, and we couldn't afford to go to the hairdressers. It was like, "Don't worry, you don't need to go to the hairdressers. I'll cut your fringe," and overcorrecting until it's barely there anymore.
I'm a man from the north. Yeah. I make up for my lack of talent with supreme confidence. I can cut your hair.
Don't worry, I'm your dad. I'll cut your hair.
It is odd. It's a bit like a sort of what do you call it? Those like mullets that people in Southern America have, where it's exceptionally short at the front and exceptionally long at the back. This guy was doing trailer trash mullets before trailer trash was even invented. Before trailers were even invented.
Right, and then sticking on top of that, this really upper class, like, long thing with, like, what do you call those, coifs or coifs or something? I don't know. So, he's mixing a lot of styles. That shows confidence, I guess.
He's got a ribbon in his hair. That's kind of cute. But yeah, his features are very defined, aren't they? I think I'm covering up the hair because that's a bit of a turn off. It looks like it could smell and be a bit greasy. But I think with shampoo, it would be a yes.
So, you're going to hand him a bottle of Alberto Balsam and say, as long as you put this in your hair, we're on. Was someone saying before the pod that this image was an image that sent women of the time wild? Were you saying that, Andy?
Well, Morris's biographer, Governor's
Gouverneur Morris, we have not introduced his full name, correct? Yes.
Yeah, we've not revealed his full name yet. His biographer claimed that this picture sent women of our time wild.
Oh!
That he had shown it to lots of women, and they'd said, "Hey, I really want to meet this guy." So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what he claimed.
So he's not just British colonies 18th century hot. He's modern Western culture hot.
Right, supposedly, yeah.
Fascinating. Well, We have spoiled his name already, but he is Gouverneur Morris, which is an odd name. Like when you first suggested him, I wasn't sure if Gouverneur was some old-fashioned spelling of governor, and he was a governor, but he's not. His name is Gouverneur, is his Christian name, and Morris. Gouverneur Morris was born January the 31st, 1752, the son of Lewis Morris Jr., a judge, politician, landowner, and active link on Wikipedia, and his second wife, Sarah Gouverneur, from whom he takes his name, and she is not an active link on Wikipedia. The American Revolution left him homeless as Morris split from his family over the issue, while with his mother allowing the British to camp at their family estate, Morrisania. His family estate was called Morrisania. He's called Morris.
Did they have rides?
Really?
Did they have a mascot? Tell me they had a mascot.
Would the rides at Morrisania be themed around his family? Or would they be themed, like, I don't know, around the American War of Independence? I can't quite make out what it would be.
They could maybe be themed around his hair, I think. You could have a ride, which was to ride one of those things up and down and up and down.
Because it sort of goes into what looks a bit like a ponytail at the back, and that could be like I don't know, like one of those Alton Tower style rides where it dips over and then you sort of shoot down the mud. Could be quite good.
Right.
Kath, what would you call your family estate if you had one?
I mean, it's never going to happen, so it's probably not an issue that I need to worry about too heavily. But, I mean, Matherland? Matherzania? Matherville, Massachusetts.
I like the idea of you calling it Mathertown, Massachusetts, but it is just in Greater Manchester. That would be quite nice.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of any for myself.
Mathertown, Massachusetts in Salford Keys.
Yeah. I couldn't think of any for myself. I thought of some for you, Andy. Andy Gawthorpe. You could have the Gawptress of Solitude, and the other one I thought of was Hampton Gawpt.
How about Gawthorpe Park? We've not overlooked that.
Well, I did overlook that, but that's why you're here, Kath, to fill in the blanks.
Is there? So I know that somewhere in Yorkshire there's a Gawthorpe Hall that's like a manor house, and just to keep my like northern working class bona fides asserted, it's nothing to do with me or my family. I don't know anyone it's to do with, but there is a Gawthorpe Hall, and it's full of peacocks because I found out that apparently in like Anglo-Saxon or some old language, Gawthorpe means place where there is peacocks. So I've been walking around all my life with that name, not realizing that it was associated with peacocks, but there is a Gawthorpe Hall.
Oh man, you're going to have to get a peacock now. It's going to be mayhem just running around your house.
Right.
I reckon,
yeah, well,
Go on.
Well, my wife's been wanting us to get a dog. And we have a 4-year-old child, so I'm like, do we really need some other small, insane creature running around here? But peacock might be a nice compromise. Probably lower maintenance than a dog, and much nicer tail. So I could do that.
Can you imagine it trying to open its tail out?
Right.
I think I know what's happened with this Gawthorpe estate that you're talking about. I reckon, and I'm getting this is sort of informed by the Danny Dyer, Who Do You Think You Are episode. I think your family was on the wrong side of the English Civil War.
Right, that might be it.
Do you know what I mean?
True.
Because that's why Danny Dyer went from being descended from a king of England. And admittedly, we all are, really, if you go back far enough. But his family was in the court of Henry VIII. But because they were on the wrong side of the Civil War, they got everything was stripped of them. So I reckon the reason you ended up in Hull, working class, is because you were clearly on the wrong side in the Civil War, and they kept all the wealth, and they kept all the what did you say it was, peacocks?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna need your gun, your badge, and your peacock emporium. No.
Now, most of the episodes we do of Historical Hot or Not, it's just who we talk about. It's just the whim of Catherine and I, who we're interested in. But actually, this is a rare episode where the subject has been suggested by the guest. I think a previous example was the episode where we interviewed Meryl O'Rourke, and she suggested we do Any to Berber. It turned out very well. When we invited you on this podcast, you suggested that we did Gouverneur Morris, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, because I think he's probably the most interesting of the founding fathers. Now, that's not, or the funniest of the founding fathers. Now, that's not, he's not got a lot of competition there, but he's the only one who's a really colorful character who I can imagine being the subject of a comedy podcast. So that's why I suggested him.
Can you tell us about his career?
Yeah, sure. So, you already mentioned that he was born into this kind of wealthy family in what's now New York City. And so, insofar as there was like an aristocracy in the American colonies, he was part of it. And when the American Revolution happened, he ended up being involved in it in lots of kind of peripheral ways. But his first reaction to the revolution was just to think, shit, we've got to make sure that this revolution against the British doesn't turn into a revolution against rich guys with great wigs like me at home. We have to make sure that like the anger of the people stays on the British and not on kind of local wealthy people. And so he kind of, we have this myth about the American founders that they were super into democracy and that they all just, they founded America to be this bastion of democracy forevermore. But actually, most of them thought like Morris did. They didn't really like the common people, they didn't really trust them. And they wanted to set up a country which wouldn't be ruled by the British, but would be ruled by, local aristocrats.
By us.
Right, exactly. And probably Morris didn't really do that much in the revolution. I mean, like, one of his biographers said that if all the founding fathers had been like Morris, then the revolution just wouldn't have happened because they would have all been too busy, like, chasing women and drinking or whatever. But the one thing that he is famous for is that he's the guy that actually wrote the Constitution. So it doesn't mean that like he came up with the ideas behind it. They had all these committees where that happened, but he was the guy that actually wrote the final words in the Constitution. So he's known as the pen man of the Constitution, and that's kind of what he's famous for. But in my view, the best thing he did, well, or the funniest years of his life are actually after that, when he goes to Paris and he's the American ambassador to Paris. And like when he got there, he, like many founding fathers, he visited Paris and had this impression of it, and most of them hated it. So most of the founding fathers got there and they were like, shit, this is like one big orgy. Everyone in Paris society is just banging everybody else. This is completely against our Christian principles. And Jefferson said it was hell on earth, but Morris just absolutely loved it. He was like, where has this been all my life? And he loves hanging out there, and tons of kind of crazy stories happen. So that's why I recommended him, because I thought there was enough funny stuff to fill an hour of banter.
I've been reading about
but he's not being.
Go on, Kath, sorry.
So he's not just being a filthy sauce bag. He's like, no, I'm just integrating myself with the culture.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Integrating himself with French Quim, more like.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so you go back to the Constitution. I understand he was the one who came up with "We the People of the United States," because before that it was going to be "We the People of the States of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York," and it would have gone on. And there was only 13 states back then. Can you imagine if they'd have kept that, and now they were having to do like these 50 states? Just take bloody forever.
Yeah, so he was really into this idea that there shouldn't be really separate states and that it should be a really unified country, which wasn't how a lot of people thought about that back then. And he personally contributed to this project by sleeping with as many women as possible from all 13 of those states. That was the melting pot as far as he was concerned. And he was probably like he was the founding father who you most get the impression that his life wasn't just all politics. He didn't even really care about politics that much. The rest of them were really kind of intense and serious, and they get into all these feuds with each other and have all of these obsessions. But Morris was just kind of this happy-go-lucky guy who was really happy in his private life, really happy just having all these affairs with women. And that's like, despite the fact that he suffered from massive personal adversity. So I guess you probably, when you were researching him, came across this, that he was disabled. He had a wooden leg, and also most of one of his arms was completely burned off in an accident when he was younger as well.
They're two separate incidents.
Yeah, so two separate incidents. So the first one, which isn't really funny, it's just kind of a tragic story of a child getting injured, was that he was at home and there was a kettle with water in and he knocked it off down his arm. And we never get like a proper sort of gruesome description of exactly what it looked like, but you basically, most of the flesh was gone from his arm.
Ugh.
And then, so that was pretty bad. But then also he lost his leg jumping out of a carriage, supposedly while he was trying to escape from the husband of someone that he was sleeping with. And he got it,
What a lad.
yeah, and right, and he got it caught in like the axle of the carriage, and the carriage just kept on driving, and it completely, broke his shin and sort of spun it round and stuff. And then the leg had to be amputated. So these was the kind of japes that he was getting into while like Madison and Hamilton and whatever were just busy, having boys' night, kind of writing the Bill of Rights or whatever.
That must have been the worst time to have that kind of surgery.
Right, yeah, because there's, I mean, the anesthetic is just basically have a bottle of whiskey.
Yeah.
Actually, it turned out that probably it didn't need to be amputated. Just the first doctor that found it amputated it, and then Morris's actual doctor said no, you didn't need that to happen at all. And I mean, we don't want to give a spoiler here, but kind of gruesome surgery is a big theme in his life, right? Because also the way that he
Yes.
dies.
We'll get to
is
that. Let's
pretty,
not spoil the big twist at the end.
yeah, but it's a big twist.
Yeah, I did read that he would, when he was in France, and obviously it was the French Revolution, not a great time to be sent off to France for a couple of years, really, was it? But
No.
he would take his leg off if people were getting a bit, and you look fancy too, mister. Like, let's to the guillotine with you. He'd just take his leg off and brandish it and be like, oh, you've lost my leg fighting for freedom. And everyone would be like, yeah.
Right. Right. And I mean he was actually getting up to some real like Scarlet Pimpernel shit in Paris. Like this wasn't just the imagination of some mob. He was actually like sheltering aristocrats in his apartment and I mean I don't know if I believe this, but supposedly sheltering weapons in his apartment that were supposed to be used by people that were opposed to the revolution. So, yeah, he was walking around, with that fancy hair, looking really fancy, and he nearly got arrested a bunch of times. And like you say, he would take the leg off and say, Do you remember that? So, Donald Trump, famous, I did a segue there, Donald Trump didn't go to Vietnam, right? And he got asked about this once, and he said, Oh, yeah, I didn't go, but my Vietnam was avoiding getting an STD while I was sleeping around New York
He
in the
did say that,
1970s.
yeah.
And, and this is exactly what that reminds me of, right? That Morris is like, well, yeah, saying he lost it battling for freedom, but in fact he was just this horn dog who was running away from his husband
Battling
because he
for
was
his
banging
right
his
to
wife.
bang rich men's wives, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
What I like,
That was his Vietnam.
what I like about this is he's putting it about there despite having a deformed arm and no leg. And it reminds me of that thing that Larry David says in Curb Your Enthusiasm, where he says, women love a self-confident bald man. Anyone can be confident with a full head of hair. And he probably had that effect on like, this guy has a peg leg with the flesh entirely burnt off one limb, and he's still laying it on smooth. That's got a bonus points. They must be loving it. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that, from what I've read about women's reactions to him, that's basically right on the money, that he's this really tall, really handsome guy. He's kind of, particularly when he's in France, he's interesting because he's foreign, although he spoke excellent French, but he had sort of different, yeah, he was an outsider. And he had these disabilities which in 18th century clothes wouldn't have been that visible normally because they're very baggy and kind of don't reveal that much. But then obviously when you get to the bedroom there's no hiding a peg leg, or a horribly disfigured arm. But he still had this massive reputation as a ladies' man, and his the letters between him and his friends about his sexual conquests are pretty like edgy banter for the 18th century. They're really kind of, Morris is like complaining when he's in some sort of village in the middle of nowhere, like, oh, there's no woman here who's elegant or whatever. They're all kind of built like a brick shit house. I'm translating here, right? But that's basically what he's saying. And one time when Morris was in a really bad mood, his cousin writes to him and he's like, "What's up with you? Did you like get the pox from a whore again?" And like most of the letters between founding fathers do not have this kind of banter in them. So that's why I think he's really funny. And when he lost that leg, when his friends found out about it, his John Jay, who was another kind of, semi-famous founding father, was just completely exasperated with all of these stories of Morris's escapades. And he writes to somebody else, I really wish it wasn't the leg that he'd lost, but it was something else. Then we wouldn't have to be putting up with this crap anymore. So he was
probably
an
meant his
interesting guy.
patriotism. He probably meant his patriotism.
Right, I'm sure he meant something like that. Yeah, not his penis. But...
I did have a little look online as well. There's a picture put up of his peg leg, but it was I did not realise that it was on a stand. So it looked like the foot of it. It looked like it was Bender's leg from Futurama. If you go on his Wikipedia page, which I think would be excellent if he just had this big, wide base on it. Don't need
Right,
shoes.
so he's basically like, he's wheeling this thing around, but it is making absolutely no dent in his performance with the ladies. I mean, like while he's in Paris, so he's documented of having had sex in the Louvre, in a carriage, in a waiting room at a convent. I don't know like why he was in a waiting room at a convent or why he had sex there, but like on another occasion, he's staying in Hamburg in like this apartment he's renting, and he's having it away with both of the landlord's daughters.
Wow.
He even like when he was recovering from having the accident with the carriage, he went and stayed in his friend's house, and then that friend's wife promptly falls in love with him, sleeps with him, and then writes him these like saucy letters for the rest of his life. So I don't know what his secret was, but whatever it was, he was hot according to historical figures.
To everyone.
Right.
One thing I like about him, outside of him bagging every rich lady between Washington and Paris, is that he was very anti-slavery, and like very like vocally anti-slavery as well. At a time when that wasn't necessarily popular. I have some of his words here that he said. So before he went to France, he was in the Continental Congress. You are right about him not fighting, because when you read his biography, it's confusing because he seems to split with his family on the issue of American independence. So I then thought, right, they're supporting the British. He's probably going to go off and fight. And he doesn't. He seems to just almost go straight into the Continental Congress. Maybe it's because he's... I don't think he's lost his leg by this point, but he has hurt his arm. And maybe because of that, they decided, oh, maybe you can't be in the army. I don't know. Anyway, go on.
Well, and there's actually another funny thing here because, so like you said, he couldn't join the military because he lost his arm. But then, well, they wouldn't put him in a leadership position. And then they said, okay, you can come and serve in the militia, but you're going to have to serve under this other guy who's going to be colonel, and he's a shoemaker. And Morris was just like, fuck this, I am not going and serving under a shoemaker because that's beneath my social
he was a
status.
he was a full-on snob then.
Yeah, complete snob.
Wow. That makes him very dislikable.
That's the thing.
Go on, Kath.
Yeah, that's the thing that gets me. Like I've been on board this whole time, and then you're like, but he does hate the poor. And you're like, ugh, but I'd have been poor. I mean,
Right.
I am poor, but even more so in those times.
Right, and it's kind of this funny thing then. Does the vocal anti-slavery make up for the hatred of the poor? And I mean, like, I don't believe that we have to think about historical figures in this kind of balance, right? They just were what they were, and I mean, yeah, but he was pretty bad in a lot of ways, but he did have some super... Sorry, Aidan, I interrupted you. I think you were going to say some of his words from the Congress
Yes.
about slavery.
Yes. Before I go on to that, it is interesting, this idea that he was like very anti-slavery but very anti-poor. But maybe it's not massively different from people now, because I find now like a lot of people are very anti-racist, but I don't think, especially in England, I don't think anyone gives a shit about class. As in, I don't think anyone has particularly that much compassion to the poor. Like the same kind of people who would denounce most types of racism, sexism, and I don't know, genderism. You will hear them saying words like "chav" quite freely. So I sort of feel like in modern politics, like sort of anti-poverty classism is a sort of thing that's been lost. So maybe that's a connection he has with modern people. Anyway, his So this is what he said of slavery. It was the curse. Shall I do the American accent again? It was the curse of heaven on the states. I sound like John Wayne. It was the curse of heaven on the states where it prevailed. Compare the free regions of the middle states where a rich and noble cultivation marks the prosperity and happiness of the people, with the misery and poverty which overspread the barren wastes of Virginia, Maryland, and the other states having slaves. Are they men? Then make them citizens and let them vote. Are they property? Why then is no other property included? The houses in this city, Philadelphia, are worth more than all the wretched slaves which cover the rice swamps of South Carolina. It's interesting, isn't it? Because there he's not just advocating for them to be citizens. He's saying let black people vote. Even in Lincoln's time when they freed the slaves, the idea that you would give black men or the freedmen the vote was seen as really radical, like way outside of like almost like the Jeremy Corbynism of the day. And so I think it's really cool that he's, despite his class snobbery, is a big advocate for this.
Yeah, and I mean that I completely agree, and that passage you just read is kind of interesting because what this is about is the issue of representation. So at the Constitutional Congress, they agree on this thing called the 3/5 compromise, which basically says that when like allocating seats in Congress and votes in the Electoral College, the southern states are going to get to count every single slave as 3/5 of a person. To what, so basically they will get more votes than they would have if only the people who were voting, if that makes sense, right? So they can basically use the slaves to increase their political power. And Morris was completely opposed to this, and he was saying, if you're gonna demand that they in some way get to vote, then they should get to exercise that vote. You shouldn't do it for them. And if you're going to treat them as property, then you should let me with my fancy mansion have more votes, because I also have a lot of property. But one thing that's kind of interesting about this is that people don't often kind of realize this about slavery, but in the time of the Constitutional Convention, most people in America, including people in the South, genuinely believed that slavery was on its last legs as an institution. So they didn't really think that it was going to last that much longer. And because this was before cotton was intensively cultivated, so basically nobody was actually making that much money out of slavery at this point. And by, like 30 years later, when cotton has been widely cultivated, all the white people in the South are getting super rich off slavery. That's when they start developing this sort of elaborate racial ideology to justify it. And that's when they get really, really sort of laying the groundwork for what becomes the Civil War. But at the time of the Constitutional Convention, people just weren't really thinking that the future of slavery was really something that existed. They thought, okay, it's just going to die of its own accord anyway. So it was a bit easier for Morris to say things like this because, it wasn't thought that, okay, 30 years from now, there's going to be 10 million more black people. And it was a completely different politics.
He's saying this in the 1780s. You're saying if he'd been saying this in the 1840s, the 1850s, it would have been much more of a political hotbed to get into. An interesting thing about that as well is, so I read that he said he was against new Western states being added, and because he was said, I've got the quote here, because he was worried that the interior wilderness could not furnish enlightened national statesmen or something like that. But it's interesting that from a slavery point of view, because it is the very issue of slavery being expanded into new Western states that triggers the Civil War. So although it does seem like a mad thing for him to say, no, let's have no new states apart from the ones we already have, which is, as we've said, is only about 13 back then. Actually, had they have stuck to that idea, if he'd have been, if he'd managed to enforce that, arguably the Civil War might never have happened. because they would never have tried to expand slavery beyond that. It's interesting. What if, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is another thing that people don't often realize when they think about the history of this period, that we look back on it and we say, okay, this is obviously the beginning of, the 13 colonies spreading over the whole continent, and that was just destined to happen. But in Morris's day, around the time of the Constitutional Convention, that was not the widespread assumption, and many, many people were opposed to that. And actually, Morris was specifically opposed to it. I mean, for two reasons. Firstly, because, like you said, he thought that anyone who went to, and this was a very common view, that anyone who went to live in the West would sort of degenerate to become a savage. And so, like racial views were very confusing around these times. So just to give you
That's
an
what happens if
example,
you move to Rochdale. You degenerate into.
Hey.
like one really popular racial view around this time was that the reason black people were black was because they couldn't control their passions, and their passions were like some sort of sun inside them that warmed up their skin and made it black. And if you could civilize them, then they would cease to be black because that sun would go away and they would just magically turn white, or their children would be white.
If it was
So people
true
had
that your
all
passions could turn you black, then Gouverneur Morris himself would be the blackest brother in the United States by this point.
right, that is absolutely true. And but I mean, he's living I mean, one thing you can say about him is that, he never judges anybody for sleeping around, or he never judges anybody for that kind of like, I don't know how you
He's
say
not a
that, like
hypocrite.
virtuous. Yeah,
He would
but
never slut shame.
exactly. He did not slut shame. He did not slut shame even once.
He
But he
loved him.
did believe that if, you went and lived in Western Pennsylvania, you were basically going to become a Native American, and that made you, unfit to be a citizen of the United States. But he also believed that, and this is kind of the prescient thing that Aidan's talking about, that he foresaw that this process of expansion would become the thing that might tear the two halves of America apart, that he sort of foresaw this conflict over slavery expanding into the West in a way that I think a lot of other people didn't. He didn't really do anything about it because he was too busy,
Too busy
living the high
fucking.
life, but he did have that insight.
I was kind of hoping to talk about his career and then the women in his life. But the problem is, his career is just banging women. Like when he gets a job, he seems to just use it as a platform to have lots of sex. So we've actually already covered a lot of his romantic exploits. The woman he banged in the Louvre was, I believe, the novelist, French pronunciation is going to be bad, Comtesse Adelaide de Flout, or Flout. Or...
Can you do
That's
that
right.
now in an American accent?
Do you want me to mispronounce a French name in an American accent? He had a
Yes,
love
please,
affair
yeah.
with the novelist Comtesse Adelaide de Flout. Yeah, and he was caught in the museum. He seemed to have quite good taste in women, actually. He banged the American poet and novelist Sarah Wentworth Apthorpe Morton. So he did like to bang his literate women. I suspect if you put him in a book group, it would just degenerate immediately into a massive orgy. We've covered his life. We've covered his romances. Andy, how did Gouverneur Morris die?
Oh no, can we talk about his wife?
Oh, he does have a, he does have a wife.
His wife and then his death. Wife and death.
Wife and death. Do you know who he married? I've got
Gouverneur
notes. If you,
Morris.
do you know who he married, Andy? I've got notes. If not,
Yeah. I can talk about that if you want.
go for it.
So he did eventually get married at age 57. He thought, okay, maybe it's time to settle down a little bit, right? I've got a wooden leg, I've got a really bad gout. Maybe I'm not performing in the women market. That's a terrible phrase. Let me say that again. I mean, like, no, I was gonna say marriage. Maybe I'm not performing in the dating market like I used to. So he's back in America, 57, and he married this woman called Nancy Randolph, and she was in her mid 30s. Now, Nancy was nationally famous because she'd been involved in this kind of tabloid scandal that pretty much everybody in America knew about at this time, where she basically was accused of having a child with her brother-in-law and then conspiring with him to murder that child when she gave birth. So basically, a child was found dead at her property. She'd supposedly been pregnant, and she went on trial for this. She got the best lawyers in America, and they just, they were like, Nancy Randolph doesn't even exist. These guys are such good lawyers. They just completely kind of befuddled the jury. She gets away with it, but she's cast out of polite society. And basically, no, she just thinks, okay, no one's ever going to marry me. But Morris does eventually meet her, takes a liking to her, and eventually settles down at this ripe old age of nearly 60. Then he even sticks by her when later she's accused of killing the brother-in-law that she supposedly had the incestuous child with. But Morris is like, I've done worse, probably. I'll stick with her. And they were happily married until the day that Morris died, supposedly.
How do you think her relationship with her sister was at the end of all of this?
Right. Well, so actually, one of the things that people used to say in her defense was that, well, this can't be true because she continued to live with that sister for like 12 years after it
Shit.
happened, right? So I guess the sister didn't believe it, or the sister was incredibly forgiving. I don't know. But I mean, lots of people really hated her for this. And actually, when she married Morris, people are writing him letters saying, she's going to kill you. Like, you can't trust this woman. She's a murderer. So loads of people hated her. But Morris, again, I think it says something about him, that he in his personal relations with people, he was very empathetic and humane, despite these prejudices that he had. And he did always kind of people that turned up in his life who were in bad situations, he was very, very generous to them very often.
And what happened in the end? Did she kill him? Or did he have, dare I say, a more entertaining death?
So, Governor Morris has a distinction of being the only founding father who died after performing surgery on his own penis. And I think that's quite a distinction. It's one that you don't read about in many American history textbooks. I'm writing an American history textbook right now, and I'm going to move heaven and earth to get this fact in there.
Yeah.
But usually it's not something that is talked about much. But it's not long after he married Nancy, so I guess it's like 7 or 8 years after he marries Nancy. His health's pretty bad. He's got really bad gout, which is this disease that you get from kind of drinking too much and eating too much, and it makes it kind of painful for him to walk. He's getting really weak. Medicine back then wasn't great, so he's getting all these gruesome treatments like bloodletting and enemas and stuff like that. And to top it all off, he gets a urinary tract infection and he can't piss. And he's getting panicked about this. Days are going by and he's like, I've not pissed in like 4 days. I need to do something about this. So he gets a piece of whalebone that he probably took from one of his wife's corsets and he jams it into his dick in an attempt to create basically something to piss out of, so that he can get past this blockage.
It's a catheter. And he's trying to make a catheter out of a whalebone, right?
Right, exactly, a catheter.
So this is going down his urethra.
Yes, yeah, right.
God.
Actually, into the urethra to try to sort of get past the blockage. And supposedly, and I only actually found this out when I was just brushing up for this podcast, but supposedly, this is not the first time in his life that he'd done this. He had done it once previously with a piece of wood, a piece of hickory, and it had actually worked. And then he wrote to his mates about it. So after, he eventually, this time when he's 64, not quite so, such a strong immune system in the penis as when he was younger. So he gets an infection, which overwhelms him and he dies. But his mates are like, yeah, makes sense. He did that before. So, we totally buy the story that he's done it again. Gets the infection, he dies, and it's a really sad way to go. And of course, none of the newspapers can report it, so they just say he died after a distressing incident. That's it. But people who are in the know, they know, because his friends are kind of writing letters about it.
Dead at 64
It's one
from
of those, isn't
whalebone
it?
insertion. Incidentally, the Beatles song "When I'm 64," that's what it's about.
Right.
Sorry, Kath, you were about to say something.
I was say it's one of those where it's like, of course that's how he died, isn't it? You know, like, we had a cat and she was fucking horrible. We had her for 10 years and at no point was she ever nice. And then a neighbour murdered her. And you're like, of course that's how she was going to die. She was always going to die. Like, he was always going to die of a dick-related injury, wasn't he? There was nothing...
Live by the
Right,
whalebone
yeah.
catheter, die by the whalebone catheter.
Right, exactly. And and I think he would have been happy to go out that way, I mean, he had a really kind of optimistic disposition. He always looked on the funny side of things, and I think he would absolutely love it that we were sat here now 220 years later talking about that dick-related death.
You
That's
have
what he
to-
would want to be
you-
known for.
You have to be an optimist to try and make a catheter out of the skeleton of one of the world's largest land mammals. A pessimist
your
would
own
not
dick.
do that. A pessimist would be like, I can see how this might go wrong, but he's just like, nope, nothing could go wrong here. Life's been a joy. Whoop.
Do you know what? Sometimes I don't feel very self-confident, which is why I do stand-up comedy. And do you ever get that when you're thinking like, God, I'm not worthy, I'm rubbish. And then you think, have the confidence of that guy. Have that level of self-confidence.
Right.
Oh, should I apply for this gig? Oh, would I be able to do that spot? Just go into it like, yeah, I'm going to catheterize myself with this whalebone. What? Yeah, it'll be fine. I'm going to do it.
I'm going to get a bracelet that says, what would Gouverneur Morris do? Insert something into his urethra, that's what. I'm going to do the American accent again. And
Oh,
also,
no.
I'm going to play like some like American patriotic music below it as well to give it some
Cool.
real gravitas. Do we, the people of the historical Hot or Not podcast with Catherine Mather and Aidan McCaffrey, judge Gouverneur Morris to be bangable? Will he make it onto the biotapthadistry? We shall start with you, Andy, as the guest. Should Gouverneur Morris go on the biotapthadistry? Is he hot?
Well, I think yes. My one kind of reservation is what Catherine highlighted earlier, that this kind of like hating the poor does not sit well with me, and I mean, if he had met me, he would think, I'm not even going to lend this guy a whalebone to catheterize himself. He's worth less than nothing to me. So, but I am kind of willing to put that aside based on the fact that, he was a product of his upbringing. And I think that from almost everybody else that I know about from this period who came from that kind of upbringing, he was a much more humane, enlightened, and charismatic guy. So, would I marry him? Maybe not. The barriers of social distinction and wealth and class are too great. Would I bang him? Sure.
Good answer. Kath, would you bang Gouverneur Morris?
Honestly, pretty much exactly what Andy said there. I think he wouldn't piss on me if I was on fire, but that's because he got a urinary tract infection. I dislike the hating of the poor, and I realise I said I was poor before. I mean poor by global standards. I'm doing all right before you start atting at me or whatever. Like, shut up. But yeah, I think that I am probably wouldn't want to spend a life with him. Although I have killed a child, so he could have been into me. That could have made him overlook the destitution. But I think, yeah, I am quite naive and open to manipulation through compliments. So yeah, sure, I would. I think I would bang him. Also, his personality seems interesting.
I think we're 3 for 3. I'm going to say also, yes, he's going on the biotapthadistry for all the reasons you two said. A bit of a snob, but we do, if we think someone's fun, we do let them on, because as we've said, this is kind of shag, marry, kill in some ways. Like, we don't have to marry him. We can just have a fun one-night stand with him. We can just bump into him in the court of Versailles and have our wicked way, or, I don't know, in a museum like
Or perhaps the Louvre.
the Louvre, or just one of the British museums, like, I don't know, the Keswick Pencil Museum or something, wherever you happen to bump into him. Also, one final shout out for Morris from the biotapthadistry himself. Former Hot Not Pod subject Theodore Roosevelt said of Morris, I'll do a generic American accent again. I don't think this is what Roosevelt said. I think Roosevelt had quite a thin, reedy voice, didn't he? Like, there's never been an American statesman like that. I'm not going to do that. There's never been an American statesman of keener intellect or more brilliant genius. Had he possessed but a little more steadiness and self-control, he would have stood among the 2 or 3 very foremost. On those grounds, he should be admitted to the Biotapestry. I edited that last sentence, but I'm pretty sure that's what Teddy was getting at when he said those words about him. So we are 3 for 3. Gouverneur Morris is on the Biotapestry. Quick bibliography before we go. I know Andy gave us most of the details, but I was sort of throwing in some things that I got invariably from Gentleman Revolutionary, Gouverneur Morris, The Rake Who Wrote the Constitution by Richard Brookhiser, and then I used a lot of Wikipedia and a lot of History.com, and then Andy kindly filled in all the blanks for me. So that's the end of the episode. Andy, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I've got a podcast that's called America Explained. I can't promise that it's as funny as this podcast, but it does do what it says on the tin. It does explain America. It's every 2 weeks a new episode about American politics, and you might have noticed there's a lot of American politics happening this year, and I kind of specialize in trying to explain that to people in Europe who maybe aren't, plugged into the American media like every day and following it really closely.
I will do a shout out for the podcast. I listened to 4 episodes last night, and I really enjoyed it. And if you're a history fan as well, it's worth going to, because there's a lot of commentary on the podcast about modern what's happening right now in America. But you do throw in some episodes from history. I listened to one about the Lewis and Clark expedition, which is quite interesting. That's something that I've always been quite romantic about, but it's more the outdoorsman in me who's like, yeah, trekking across America, clearing away from one side of the country to the other before trains and automobiles. But as you say in the podcast, it's a bit darker than that, because it's essentially a military exhibition that partially leads to the clearing of the way, as in the clearing of Native Americans for sort of a white settlement. So it's very interesting. And you did one about the founding fathers and what they think, which was also good, which sort of helped deconstruct some of the accepted but perhaps flawed common wisdom about what people assume the founding fathers wanted America to be. That's very interesting. Also, another thing, all the episodes are really short. They're like 20, 25 minutes long. And I love this because too many podcasts are 2 to 3 hours long.
Right.
These are digestible, they're fun, they're informative, and you should check them out. Was it Explaining America?
America Explained.
America Explained. Excellent. Is that it, Kath? Have we covered all bases?
I think we have, yeah. I mean, we are now on YouTube at Hot Not Pod. Give us a follow on there, a subscribe. I think it is on YouTube. We're starting putting these out with videos and stuff, so you can watch us. We're also on all of the social medias at Hot Not Pod, where we'll put bits out. We have got a coffee if you want to get us a. I was going to say get us a coffee. We haven't spent any of it on coffee and never will. But it's expensive doing a podcast. So yeah, if you want to support us that way, please do.
And Acast Pro, if you go to the Linktree for Linktree. Linktree.ee, whatever it's called. The Linktree, Hot Not Pod, all the links Kath just talked about, they're all there, including the Acast Pro, which will give you access to bonus content.
Yeah, we've made a load of bonus bangs, which are some slightly more whimsical episodes, such as the Turin Shroud, would we have sex? We said that we would have sex with it. I keep bringing that one up, so I don't feel like it's a spoiler to to say that. But yeah, we got a bunch of stuff on there, extra content. But all that's left to say now is please spread the word, spread your legs, and remember, it's not what's on the outside, it's what's on the inside of the coffin that counts. Goodbye.
Bye.
You have been listening to Historical Hot or Not with me, Catherine Mather, and Aidan McCaffrey. Theme song by David Eagle, and our logo is by Richard Todd. You can head over to co-b.com/hotnotpod. Over there we've got some Hot Not merch. We are currently selling branded condoms and branded badges. Get over there while stocks last.